Hello, this is Snow Day 7, or if we don't have a Snow Day 7, this is just going to be an extra lesson. We're going to go over different types of poetry. These are not the only types of poetry, but they're some of the more common types that we'll see in elementary school. You'll also see some other types of poetry as you get older into middle school and high school. So let me scroll down here. Okay, we have talked about Limerick poems before. Limerick is a humorous poem, so it's funny, consisting of 5 lines. The first, second, and fifth lines must have 7 to 10 syllables. The third and fourth lines only have to have 5 to 7 syllables. So an example of a Limerick poem would be Hickory Dickory Dock. The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 12. The mouse ran down. Hickory Dickory Dock. If you'll see, this would be the first line of the poem. It's also the title of the poem. But if you count the syllables in this poem, now remember, syllables, you could clap them out or count the vowel sounds. So we've got 1, the I, bossy O-R, or, and Y sounds like a vowel, so we treat it like a vowel. It sounds like long E, H or E. So we've got 3 vowel sounds there. We also have 3 vowel sounds in dickory, I or E, dickory. So we've got 3 plus 3 equals 6, and then we've got 1 vowel sound in dock, the short O. So we've got 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So 7 syllables in that first line, and that would match the form because it said the first, second, and fifth lines must have 7 to 10 syllables. Another type of poem is cinquain. Cinquain poem is a 5-line poem. Cinquains are particularly vivid in their imagery. Remember we talked about imagery? Imagery is when the poet or author, it could also happen in prose, in a fiction story where an author uses your senses to help you create an image or a picture in your mind of what's going on in the text, like your sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch. So cinquain is a 5-line poem. Cinquains are particularly vivid in their imagery and are meant to convey a certain mood or emotion. Remember, mood is the feeling you get after reading the text. In a cinquain poem, the first line is just the subject, like dogs. Second line describes the subject. Maybe if you were describing dogs, you'd say playful and funny. Third line are action words about the subject. Running, jumping, barking. Fourth line, feelings about the subject. I love dogs. Fifth line, synonym for the subject. Canines. Canine is another word for dog. So, dogs, playful, funny, running, jumping, barking. I love dogs, canines. That would be an example of a cinquain poem. Okay. Haiku. We've talked about haiku before as well. Haiku is a Japanese poem. 3 lines have to do with nature. So the first line in a haiku poem would have 5 syllables. The second line would have 7 syllables, and the third line would have 5 syllables. Okay, so we were talking about a haiku poem. An example of a haiku poem would be, love like a sunset, caught by no fault of my own, only time will tell. So the first line, love like a sunset. You've got love, 1, like, a sunset. That is 5 syllables. The second line, caught by no fault of my own, so 7 syllables. And the third line, only time will tell, again 5 syllables. So there's an example of a haiku poem. Okay, we've also talked about free verse as well. Free verse is a poem that does not have set form. Poets can be free to use. They can be rhymed or unrhymed and have no set pattern that is followed. So we've talked about how free verse is free. There are no rules. The poem that we had for homework last week about the natural disasters, we talked about how it did not have a rhyme scheme, so there's no rhyming pattern there. We talked about how there was not a certain number of beats or syllables at each of the lines, and it didn't even have set stanzas. It was kind of all together, and the lines were to the left and to the right and everywhere. That was a good example of a free verse poem. Shape poems. Shape poems are made up of words that have been placed in such a way that they make the shape of an object and also use words to describe the object. For example, if you were writing a poem about love, you could make the words so that they were in the shape of a heart. I'm kind of drawing a heart on the screen. So you would start with a bunch of words at the top, and then kind of gradually they'd get thinner to make a point at the bottom of the heart. That would be an example of a shape poem. The last one we're going to talk about today is a couplet, which we've also talked about in class. We've talked about a couplet. A couplet is 2 lines of poetry, one after the other, so they're right next to each other. So you've got line 1, line 2, that rhyme and are of the same length and rhythm. On our test, the first 2 lines of that poem about the seasons, and most of these stanzas in that poem were couplets. You had the rhyme scheme. Each stanza had 2 lines, and the rhyme scheme of each stanza was AA, because they ended with words that rhymed. So an example would be, I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam, I am. So this would be line 1, and see, it ends with the word ham. And this would be line 2, and it ends with the word am. So ham and am rhyme. That's an example of a couplet. A poem that is a couplet could either have one stanza that just has 2 lines in it, or there could be a bunch of couplets in a poem. So just like that poem on our test, where there was every stanza in that poem was a couplet, and it had about 12 couplets. There was one stanza in that poem that had 3 lines, but most of the stanzas in that poem about the seasons on our unit test had 2 lines that rhymed, making them a couplet. Now this is what I would like for you to do. You need to go to the discussion board. You need to pick one of these types of poems. Let me see if I can get them all on the screen for you. Okay, you need to choose one of these types of poems, either a limerick poem, cinquain poem, haiku poem, free verse, or a couplet. You could try to do a shape poem, but that would be really hard to do on the discussion board. And you need to write a poem in that format. So what you could do is you could also keep this video up and refer back to it so that you could make sure that you followed the form. Like for instance, if you wrote a limerick poem, the first, second, and fifth lines must have 7 to 10 syllables. The third and fourth lines would only have to have 5 to 7 syllables. Or if you wrote a cinquain, you would need to know what goes on the first line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line. And haiku, you'd need to have 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second line, 3rd in the third line. Free verse, there are no rules. It is whatever you would want to write. However, it would all need to be about the same subject, just like our natural disasters poem on our homework. And then a couplet. Of course, that would be 2 lines that rhymed. So your assignment is to pick one of these types of poems and write a poem in that form. Thanks, and have a great day.